Oil and Foreign Policy, The Turning Point, World War II.
In today's world, oil is consumed in enormous amounts, costing billions of dollars and affecting political decisions around the world. For example, in 2008, the United States spent an average of $1.19 billion on crude oil per day. Oil, however, was not always such an important commodity. In fact, it was first used in very small quantities, mostly for kerosene lamps in the early 19th century. Later, the Industrial Revolution put more emphasis on energy resources, and throughout the beginning of the 20th century, oil became more and more useful for industry, agriculture, and weaponry.
World War II provides a framework to understand the change in the significance of oil and how it came to be such a commodity in today's world. While many of the oil-powered machines crucial to victory had been invented in the years around World War I, World War II shows how access to oil began to affect international relations. The foreign policies and military tactics of involved countries made World War II a turning point in oil's trajectory to become the global commodity it is today, and allow the war to be interpreted as a conflict centered around increasingly vital access to oil.
By World War II, airplanes, surface warships, submarines, tanks, cars, and other engine-powered machines used for land and sea transport were crucial to military success. While many of the important players in the war had the capabilities to manufacture these engine-powered machines, they did not all have equal access to the oil necessary to power them. Furthermore, oil was still a key part of the manufacture of munitions and petroleum-based synthetic rubber. As a result, the war was not just about who could produce and maintain the best weapons, but also about who could gain access to enough oil to fuel them. American wartime statistics illustrate oil's necessity. About half of U.S. shipments overseas during the war consisted of petroleum products. Gasoline output was about 18 times greater in the latter years of World War II than in World War I, and 80 times greater for American aviation specifically.
Due to the importance of petroleum, policy decisions during the war centered around attempts to gain access to oil. 3 cases in particular illustrate the shift of oil as a crucial component in foreign policy. Germany's decision to break their pact of non-aggression with the Soviet Union and attack in 1941, Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor in 1941, and the United States' involvement in the Middle East as a way to ensure future access to petroleum.
1. Oil was a great concern for Hitler, who was using it in greater and greater quantities as German oil consumption increased from 3.0 million tons in 1940 to an average of 4.6 million tons per year from 1941 to 1943. While Germany did produce synthetic fuels, they were not adequate for the growing consumption rates, leaving Germany to search for other options. Part of the reason Germany broke their 1939 Pact of Non-Aggression with the Soviet Union and attacked in June of 1941 was to gain control of the Baku oil fields located in what is modern-day Azerbaijan. The Germans were unsuccessful in their mission, and the entrance of the United States in the war 6 months later spread their already thinning oil resources even further. Germany continued to waste more and more resources and troops on unsuccessful attempts to gain access to Soviet oil. As a result, inadequate oil supplies were an important factor in the turn of the tides in the Allies' favor and Germany's downfall.
2. Japan's fateful decision to attack Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was also driven by the need for oil. Since modernization, Japan has depended heavily on imports of oil, most of which came from the United States in the years leading up to the war. However, on July 25, 1941, in the face of Japan's expansion into Southeast Asia from its holdings in Manchuria, President Roosevelt ordered a freeze of all Japanese assets in the United States. This led to an indirect oil embargo of U.S. oil supplies to Japan. Military advisors in Washington had warned the president that these actions might lead to a Japanese attack, which is exactly what happened on December 7, 1941. Unfortunately for the Japanese and German war efforts, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor brought them an implacable enemy with nearly 10 times as much oil production as ever came under the influence of the Axis powers.
3. The United States did indeed have access to a large oil supply. Rich oil fields were discovered in East Texas in 1930, and U.S. ties with Latin America supplemented domestically produced oil. However, during the war, American policymakers were warned that the United States would soon become a net importer of oil. Given the growing importance of the commodity, it became necessary to think about future foreign oil supplies and post-war relations. Recent advances, such as the discovery of commercial quantities of oil in Saudi Arabia in 1938 by the California Arabian Standard Oil Company, and the overthrow of the nationalist Rashid Ali regime in Iraq in June of 1941, led American eyes towards the Middle East.
The British, however, already had colonial ties to the Middle East, and therefore its oil fields. This meant the United States had to take into account one of their allies in the war, as they began to negotiate oil contracts. Therefore, the goal of the United States in the Middle East was twofold: to wean countries like Iraq and Saudi Arabia off of British influence through support of Arab nationalist objectives and a substantial commitment of Lend-Lease largesse for New Deal-inspired development schemes, which would partly cover the second objective, to secure petroleum for the West and to tie Iraq into the post-war system of pro-American alliances. Thus began United States foreign oil policy in the Middle East, which has had a global effect on international relations throughout the Cold War and into the 21st century.
In conclusion, World War II provides the context in which oil began to play a crucial role in foreign policy and military tactics, a role it still has today. The German attack on the Soviet Union, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, and the beginning of American involvement in the Middle East demonstrates the enormously significant political decisions that were made based on oil beginning in World War II. These decisions allow the war to be read as a conflict centered around access to oil. As a result, oil as a commodity has been imbued with intricate levels of political meaning that can be traced back to World War II.